So on this channel I've been doing a lot of electronics experiments, and some of it's been getting kind of weird. So I think I'm going to sort of climb down from the mountain on that. And I also got an oscilloscope. So I'll probably just be doing more simple and straightforward things with the electronics. But what I really wanted to get back to also is looking at medical articles I find interesting. Because, I mean, I did 10 years in the rare disease office at FDA as a medical reviewer, so just basically looking at studies all day. I was driven out for complaining about the quality of the FDA review, if that makes anyone feel a little better. So, what I thought we'd talk about today is it was a brief little sort of an abstract write-up that caught my attention, and it was a retrospective study looking at olive oil as treatment for the Covid-19 RSV. If you're allowed to say that. So we'll look at the study and take a look at that. But I think even before we get to that, let's just talk a little bit about olive oil in general, because there's really a lot to it. And to do that, let's go to the web. So maybe an interesting place to start is that you consider olive oil to be healthy, but what exactly does that mean? And the absolute best clinical endpoint is mortality. So with a lot of these natural things, you can often just put in something like, here we'll put in overall or all-cause mortality or something. And as opposed to, some of the pharmaceutical patented approaches that are either, maybe they treat a headache, but they are very dangerous, or, in extreme cases, like some cancer treatments are just like mustard gas derivatives, just astonishingly toxic. So you can put in something like this, and you get some interesting results for a lot of more natural approaches. So let's just throw that in. Go. How do I make it go? Okay, I figured out how to use the internet here. But this is the first search result. 19% lower risk of total, and that's sort of the key one. If you have cardiovascular disease mortality that goes down, but cancer mortality goes up, but total mortality 19% lower in people with the highest category of olive oil consumption. So this study out of Harvard would be a whole nother video, but it's just kind of a nice place to start. And just to go off on tangents immediately, well, there might be bias and all that. There are all kinds of different biases that can come into play, and often unintentionally, and goes a lot into design study. But the one bias that you don't ever see mentioned in a textbook is financial bias, and that's the most significant one of all. The revenue stream for not even lipid lowering agents in general, just the statins. The last time I checked it, it's equal to like the GDP of a small country, like something like the GDP of Venezuela or something. So when you get a study of someone trying to get a statin to market, you can be very concerned that it's, well, in the exclusion criteria you just excluded everyone with high cholesterol in the treatment group. It's rarely quite that obvious, but unless you're going to say, big olive oil here, then there's less of a concern about financial bias, and then you're just left with the traditional biases. So we're not going to go through this in general. It's just to point out that olive oil is generally regarded as healthy for good reason. And here's a second study. Yeah, we won't dwell on this, but just that this is a different journal, a different study, and lower risk of total and cause-specific mortality. Very good, very good. And here's a third study, and this was what's called a meta-analysis, where they go back and they look at a bunch of studies and group together and think that they're really clever for doing that. But they looked at 13 studies and all-cause mortality. The p-value, less than 0.001. So that's very good. That's very significant. And just to get that out of the way early here, what that means is that there's less than a 0.1% chance that it was by finding that the finding was by chance. So in other words, if you have a deck of cards, you could deal and someone could get 4 aces, but that happens very, very rarely. And so a p-value is saying that the way these two groups between the treatment and the control group were distributed would only happen by chance, less than 0.1%, so less than 1 in 1,000 times. So it's a strong statistical significance. And generally it's declared statistically significant if the p-value is less than 0.05. Okay. So I'd known for some time that olive oil is healthy, and it's a good oil to eat. But I thought it was primarily, and it probably still is primarily due to the fact that it has a double bond in what's called the omega-3 position, and omega-3 fatty acids are healthy. So what does that mean? So let's see here. Croatian English Chemistry Dictionary. I like it. Let's see what this is. Really, I just want to show this. I'm not going to go to the dictionary. So here's your fatty acid, and they can be different lengths. And when you go from the end towards the double bond with the oxygen, if you go 6 in, that's an omega-6 fatty acid. But if you're 3 in, and there's a double bond there, that's an omega-3 fatty acid. The omega-3 fatty acids serve also as cellular, they do some cellular signaling as well, which is one of the reasons why they're healthy. And so it's good to have a fair amount of omega-3 fatty acids as opposed to omega-6 fatty acids. So of all the fatty acids, I would say the omega-3 are the most healthy. But there's a lot of debate about fats and oils in general as to how healthy they are. And really, I think most of the natural fats and oils aren't unhealthy at all, in moderation. I mean, you can overdo anything. So if you have a double bond, that's called, if there are no double bonds, then the fatty acid is called unsaturated. If there's one double bond, it's monosaturated fatty acid. What did I say? I think I said if there's a double bond, no double bonds, it's unsaturated. If there's no double bonds, it's fully saturated with hydrogens all along here. If there's one double bond, it's monounsaturated. 2 or more, it's polyunsaturated fatty acid. No, I should have went to the Croatian dictionary. Omega-3 are polyunsaturated fatty acids, meaning they contain more than one double bond. The name omega-3 indicates the first double bond occurs on the 3rd carbon atom from the methyl group. And so I often hear that saturated fatty acids are not as good for you as unsaturated fatty acids, and omega-3 fatty acids are the most healthy. But what we know, just from what we looked at, is that olive oil, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, is good for you in terms of overall mortality. There's a prominent nephrologist, I want to say Ravneskov, I have to look up his name, but he wrote a whole book, Fats and Oils Are Good For You, and maybe sometime we can review that. The primary issue with fats and oils isn't, I mean, it's good to have the omega-3s and probably not great to have too much omega-6. The most important thing is to avoid the industrially created trans fatty acids. So what are trans fatty acids? So all of the bonds in both of these fatty acids are cis bonds. And so here's an example of a cis bond with the two H's there. Here's an example of a trans double bond in a fatty acid where you have the two H's across from each other. Now what happened was that unsaturated fatty acids are apparently much cheaper to come across, and so you can chemically catalyze at an industrial scale the introduction of double bonds into an unsaturated fatty acid. The problem is when you do that, you end up with a trans double bond, which initially they thought was no problem, and so you had things like what was it called? Crisco, where Crisco would replace other cooking oils, and it would be, you know, like an order of magnitude or something cheaper. So it was like better living through science, and we all know how that turns out, huh? The problem here is that trans double bonds hardly ever show up in nature. One might say the trans double bond is against nature. It's a perversion of the natural, healthy diet. So what happens is when people start eating this industrially made trans fatty acids, the body didn't have a good way of processing it, of dealing with it, and so it would lead to a lot of inflammation. And the introduction of trans fatty acids, I don't know off the top of my head, you know, we could do it as a project if people are interested, but it probably led to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of excess heart attacks throughout the world because it increased inflammation. And I imagine there wasn't, you know, too much money in keeping things with trans fatty acids. So over time, it became apparent that this is not healthy, and you started reading about getting rid of trans fatty acids. So that's really the important thing, is that you don't want to have artificial trans fatty acids in your diet. They cause inflammation, they cause heart disease, whereas, you know, omega-3s like olive oil prevent heart disease. Now there is one naturally occurring trans fatty acid that I know of that's found in it's either grass-fed butter or grass-fed meat. I'd have to look it up again. I mean, that could be another one. And, you know, surprise, surprise, that trans fatty acid is actually good for you. So that's like, you know, to my mind, the Ian McClellan or Steve Martin of trans fatty acids. I'm getting a little bit out of bounds. Let's try and get to that article. But so that's the thing, is that olive oil is good for you. Avoid trans fatty acids; they are unnatural, and unless you're getting them in grass-fed beef and grass-fed butter. So there was just a brief write-up that caught my attention for a couple of reasons, and that was that they were reporting that olive oil showed activity as a treatment for Covid-19 viral infection. And one reason that caught my eye is that, well, that's not going to be the omega-3 bond that's doing that. That has to be something else in olive oil that is good for you. So maybe the reason olive oil is so good for you is not so much, is not entirely explained by the omega-3 bond. And, secondly, also, it's just kind of interesting. Well, it's a treatment for COVID-19 infection. So let me see if I can make this work. Yay. So here's the study, and it's just a brief write-up, and it's not a notable journal. Well, I don't know that. Clinical Nutrition, ESPEN. I just mean it's not, like New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet or Nature or something like that. But it is a peer-reviewed study, and it, for all I know, that's a big journal in clinical nutrition. Maybe it's very big. But in any event, so it's a brief write-up, and so they're saying that olive oil is healthy, and been a well-known fact that olive oil, the key element of the Mediterranean diet, could capable to diminish the severity of viral infections due to its antioxidant properties. And they just say that no one's looked at olive oil as for its impact on moderate to severe COVID-19 in the hospital setting. So what they did, and this is not a randomized prospective blinded study, which is about the best that we know how to do. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful. It just means that there's more potential opportunities for bias to come into play. And, in another video, we could look at, some of the kind of textbook examples of how bias can creep in without someone noticing, especially when you have retrospective studies or a study designed like this. But it's not, that doesn't mean that's commonplace. And as I said, where you most often have to worry about shenanigans is when there's a lot of money on the line. And there's not a lot of money in olive oil as an antiviral. Okay, so what they did, they said we identified and interviewed 62 hospitalized patients, about half of them female, about 55 years old, that had COVID-19. And they reportedly used at least 50 milliliters of olive oil as a nutritional support. I don't think English is this person's first language. All of them has reportedly taken. So again, it's a brief write-up, but what they most likely did is they had the contact for the patients, and so with these 62 patients that they called up, they said, do you eat a lot of olive oil? How much do you eat per day? And again, it's not blinded, but they didn't know going in, but that's another opportunity then for bias to creep in, like, are you sure you don't take a lot of olive oil? I bet you do. But so anyways, they got, I'm guessing from a retrospective nutritional survey, that these were 62 patients that generally consumed a lot of olive oil, and they were treated with, this is how sick they were, and 10% had mild, 62% moderate, and 13% severe disease. And then they went back through records and they came up with a comparator group of 35 patients, again about half of them female, and they selected them so they were about the same age, and they had about the same, they had the same kind of treatments, and they had the same clinical pictures, except for the olive oil support. I wish this was a longer write-up because it's unclear whether these were people that took olive oil before hospitalization or were in the hospital and, I want olive oil, or were given olive oil. It's just too brief a write-up. So let's move on to the results because they're pretty remarkable to my mind. And so the first just saying, that they were pretty much the same age and gender differences, and their these blood tests were similar on the first day of hospitalization. Okay, so compared to the olive oil group, the length of stay was longer in the non-olive oil group. And here's the remarkable part: 8 days on average versus 24 days for the non-olive oil group. Now here we go back to that p-value, and p is equal to 0.001, so that's a very significant kind of, you can just eyeball it. You know, they were in the hospital on average for a third of the time. That's pretty significant. Now, some people might say, well, it's not a big study. Sometimes you don't want, you know, you're not getting any more information. You can kind of go backwards with a really big study, because suppose you have like 10,000 patients, and then it might be that the p-value is again 0.001, but it would only be, say, 8 days versus 9 days. Because you have like 10,000 patients or whatever, you can tease out that, yeah, there's a difference there, but it's not as clinically important. So what's notable here is that it's not a big sample size, but you have a strong p-value. And again, just eyeballing it, 8 days versus 24 days in the hospital, whether they were using olive oil or not. Furthermore, patients who've taken olive oil have less required ICU than those do not get olive oil. So a little less than half as many patients, 11 versus 26, ended up in the ICU. 6 patients died in the olive oil group. 14 patients died among patients in the non-olive oil group. Again, P001, even though it's not a large number, 6 versus 14. And again, that's kind of the, you know, really kind of important endpoint there, you know, whether the patient dies or not. It's kind of a big one. So less than half the patients died in the olive oil group. Now, what I like about this write-up is normally when something's said that can be a little bit, shall we say, politically controversial in medicine, they often just hedge the heck out of it when they get to the conclusion. They have the results that are just like this, but the conclusion, you know, can be concluded that olive oil might perhaps have some role as ancillary to the patented treatments, but more studies are needed. They're not doing that. They're saying olive oil, again, they kind of write in not good English. It can be concluded that olive oil consumption is capable, well, I guess that's all right, capable to reduce mortality rates and is beneficial in cases with COVID-19 infection. That's what the results show. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, that dramatic a finding from something as simple as olive oil, and you know, it wasn't like olive oil from the Antarctic. I mean, this is from Turkey. This is Mediterranean olive oil. Are there any other studies like this? We'll just take a look at one more, and then we'll wrap up this video. So there are a number of test tube studies looking at different components in olive oil and its efficacy as an antiviral against COVID and against other viruses. That's another key point here not to lose sight of. But this was one, you know, eventually, no matter how many test tube studies you do, the acid test is to give it to someone and see whether they get better or not. This one is good because it's a randomized, prospective, triple-blinded clinical trial. Not even double-blinded, it's triple-blinded. However, it's a little bit different because it's efficacy of olive leaf extract on the outcomes of these patients. So, and this is also nice because there's a full write-up. We're not going to spend too much time on this. We can kind of just go through the results in the abstract, and then there's a few things I'd point out in the actual write-up. So on the results, they had 150 patients that were randomized into two groups, and 141 made it to the end of the study. In the write-up, the primary endpoint, and that's a whole nother video there, is, I mean, if you have like 50 endpoints, one of them's going to be statistically significant just by chance. So what it looks like is their primary endpoint is vital signs, body temperature, pulse rate, respiratory rate. They also looked at erythrocyte sedimentation rate and C-reactive protein, which are both markers of inflammation. And the key thing here is that the vital signs, all of the vital signs, P less than 0.01, pulse rate, that was also statistically significant. Respiratory rate, that's a big one with viral infection there. The sed rate and the C-reactive protein, the markers of inflammation, were all statistically significantly decreased in the group that were given this olive leaf extract. And again, I like that there's no hemming and hawing there in their conclusion. Olive leaf extract can improve the clinical status of patients and decrease the length of hospitalization, because that's what they found in their data. Now, the last thing that we haven't really talked about here is, what's going on. This isn't the omega-3 fatty acids, so what's going on? Olive leaves are a rich source of phenolic compounds. For instance, allyropyrin, this one, and hydroxytyrosol. These compounds are anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antibacterial, and the key one here, antiviral. So you can kind of think about this. I don't want to get too philosophical, but might as well. Plants face a lot of the same challenges from pathogens as we do. They face challenges from fungi, from bacteria, and from viruses. And if the plant happens to be something that we eat, it's usually a non-toxic. Now, the bark protects the trunk and the stem and whatnot, but the fruit and the leaves often are infused with compounds that, again, protect the plant from bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And to the extent that the mechanism of action for the compounds that those leaves and fruits have in them overlaps with pathogens that we face, then they treat pathogens for us too when we eat them. And so that seems to be what's going on here. Now, one of the things I did, the one thing I think about this study is they used olive leaf extract, and why not use olive oil? So what they're hypothesizing, and again, it would be fun to go and look at what test tube studies there are on these compounds in terms of their antiviral activity, but that these olive leaves are rich in this, this, and this. So if we put each of those in Google, allyropyrin in olive oil, okay, it's not just in the leaf, it gives the bitter taste to olives, which I guess that's the fruit. For olive oil, what about the other one? It's, and if we go back here, may have a potent effect in preventing skin cancer development, melanoma and non-melanoma cancers. So that's your side effect. How terrible. This one is also in olive oil. It increases during the fruit maturation. Yeah, the olive's the fruit. And the olive-derived antioxidant. So everything that they're talking about that they did with this olive leaf extract is also, it could be one that's unique to the olive leaf. That's why I wish they'd done it with olive oils instead of olive leaf extract. But they're thinking it's probably from one or all of those three, and those three are also in olive oil. And further, we have another study that we just went over showing that olive oil itself has efficacy in decreasing the length of hospital stay from 24 to 8 days in patients that were consuming, I want to say it was like 50 milliliters per day of olive oil. Okay, that's it for this one. I want to get back to this, do a lot more of it, and I hope people will enjoy it and come along, because I think I might be more used to people this way. But you can see how just on this one topic alone, I mean, you can just start going down different paths and do 10 videos on this alone. But the take-home message is olive oil, very, very good for you. And it's also useful in the treatment of COVID-19 viral infection, which means it's probably, I won't say certainly, but very, very likely to be useful in the treatment of other COVID viruses, which comprise the common cold. So, cure for the common cold. Okay, thanks everyone. Talk to you later. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.